Council, let's have your attention, please. I'd like to begin our meeting by recognizing and thanking our broadcasting and media partners who broadcast and support the meeting. Ask to call our meeting to order, please. Well, there we go. Begin our meeting by just thanking and recognizing our broadcast and media partners who broadcast and report on our meeting. I thank them for that, and I'll ask the clerk to open the meeting, please.
Okay, under agenda item 1, adoption of minutes, I have a motion by councillors Nero and Shoemaker resolved that the minutes of regular council meeting September 23, 2019 be approved.
All in favor? So, council, these administrative matters won't pop up for you to vote on electronically anymore. The procedure bylaw is now changed, and you'll only vote electronically on matters that we're debating or discussing.
Under agenda item 3, declarations of pecuniary interest, Councillor Bruni has declared a conflict on the property declared surplus abutting 1 McGregor Avenue, as well as the associated bylaws, as his son and daughter-in-law are purchasers and property owners. Councillor Shoemaker, with respect to the assumption, closing, and conveyance of part of Blake Avenue and part of Atlantic Street. The purchaser is a client of his law firm. Similarly, surplus property abutting 415 Pym Street, Sioux North Holdings. Councillor Shoemaker has declared a conflict as the purchaser is a client of the law firm, as well as the associated bylaws of both of those. And Councillor Vezo-Allen has declared a conflict with respect to 8.2, the P-Patch Access Road, Northern Avenue to Princeton Drive, as she owns property in proximity to the proposed road. And Councillor Nero has declared with respect to the interest arbitration for fire, as his brother is a former firefighter.
Anything else, council? Seeing none, we'll go to item 4 on the agenda, Madam Clerk.
I have a motion by Councillors Bruni and Hilsinger resolved that the agenda for October 7, 2019 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Carried. Madam Clerk, before we get into proclamations, Councillor Bruni asked for the opportunity to address the recent storm event we had and ask a couple questions that relate to it. So we're going to give him that opportunity. Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because of the last flooding, I would like to ask Mr. Girardi, Mr. Elliott questions regarding the environmental study and preventive maintenance program for the following areas. As you are aware, well, as Councillor Nero and I are aware, Peoples Road, Hillside Drive, Hill Street, Elliott Road, Johnson Avenue, Diane Street, Posabon Crescent, Patonti Crescent, Farewell Terrace, but also on the bottom of Wilson Street, Bake Street, and Tree Lawn, all received flooding. Resident homeowners Pino, Carchidi, Pozo, Della Vedova, Guzzo, Edens, Linklaters, Armstrong, Surianis, Nevos, and Kramers are just a few that had their third flooding in 6 years. They have installed check valves, additional sump pumps, and any other preventive maintenance measures to prevent flooding. Insurance costs have doubled and tripled for these homeowners, and several residents have been notified they will not be able to purchase any insurance for their homes because of the too many claims they put in because of the flooding. So speaking to Mr. Elliott, and I do respect his opinion, and I've explained to him prior to 2013, these residents did not get flooded once. What has changed? And the research that I collected, that 50 millimeters of rain, which is about 2 inches of rainfall in a short period of time, which can be up to 12 hours, will cause flooding for these homeowners. So before 2013, it has rained 50 millimeters and no flooding has occurred. Some of these homeowners have been in these homes for 30, 40, and almost 50 years. But since 2013, they've received their third flooding. So I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Elliott, where are we with the environmental study? The resolution was passed in November 2018.
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, the resolution was passed in November of last year, and the budget was approved in January. Typically, we start environmental assessments in the fall. The request for proposal is going out shortly. To get that, we should have a consultant on board within a month or two and the EA will progress probably over the next 10 to 12 months or so. I'd emphasize here that an EA is never a quick fix. It's when you have a problem of this nature, there is considerable study and considerable consultation that you need to complete in order to determine what the final and preferred solution is. And these things can typically take much longer than a year. I expect this one maybe come in for a landing a year from now, complete, we'll know what we need to do. And at that point, council or staff will at least help council identify where the funds are going to come from, depending on what capital improvements are required. I would assume that there's going to be some stormwater storage involved, not unlike the what we did over on Pym Street, between Pym Street and McNabb, that $7 million project that was completed recently. Again, that was identified in 2011 as a major issue. So it's not a quick fix, but it is usually the best long-term fix. And my colleague, Larry Girardi, may have some things to add about the short-term things, because I know his staff have done a lot in that area.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for Mr. Girardi, but so we're looking at several years from now for a fix?
Mr. Mayor to Council Bruni, I would say the EA will take a year or so from now. We may have the solution. As long as no one submits a Part 2 order request, those things can take some time to resolve themselves. But it's fair to say that probably a year from now, we may know what the solution and what the budget for that solution is. I'm hoping it won't be terribly expensive, but if it is, we need to look at capital priorities and perhaps land acquisition. Sometimes that's required for storing water.
So in my opening statement, when I said they were not affected prior to 2013, why such a turnaround? Like, they've been flooded 3 times now.
Mr. Mayor to Council Bruni, that's precisely what the EA will tell us.
Okay, thank you. I guess to Mr. Girardi, what preventive measures have occurred since 2013 for this specific area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. What we've done since 2013 is we've opened up the creek in behind the Elliott and rail service to behind the church. That's all been cleared out. We've put in new grates. We've enlarged the culverts on People's Road, both sides, east and west. And we keep the system flushed out regularly. So right after this storm, as you would have noticed, you would have seen our trucks in the area. We're vacuuming out the catch basins and we're flushing out the sanitary and storm sewers. That's just to make sure that it can run at what capacity there is now. So no obstructions, keeping it operating and keeping the infrastructure clean.
So what was the purpose of purchasing the property on People's Road? Are you just getting ready for the environmental study once it's completed?
Yeah, certainly that was identified. We own the property in the Elliott Park area, but there were properties that were very close in line with the existing creek and ditches. So in order to prevent those homes from being damaged from the water course and for future realigning the water course to potentially to a stormwater management pond, we purchased those properties. So definitely we're going to be needing them.
Okay. And the Wellington Street underpass, again, it was flooded?
Yes, again, significant amount of water. Now, we've been making some improvements to that, and Don can certainly speak to it in a few moments, but we've made several improvements in that area to try and correct the water issues. But the rail service, right where the rail property is and Lyons property, we're dumping into it also with a lot of granular materials. So there was a lot of overland water dropping down into it from above. So we're trying to manage that also. So we're going to have to look further at flushing and cleaning those catch basins in that area. But again, you're talking about a bowl. I mean, water's going to find its way there. What we've done to it is just to empty it out quicker. So we're trying to have the underpass opened as quick as possible. It used to take quite a long time before. Now we're speeding up that process.
Okay. And one last question to both of you, if you can help. What can the residents do to prevent flooding in future, besides installing the check valves and additional sump pumps installed into their system? Any recommendations for the residents?
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, I think the main thing that residents can do is to make sure both their sanitary and their storm connections to our systems are in accordance with our bylaw. Each individual property is different. There's more emphasis sometimes on one thing than another. It depends. A good plumber is very helpful with that, and sometimes grading, lot grading and swales, maintenance of swales in the area is important as well. So those are all increments that residents can do, and we can assist them with some of that advice. Again, a plumber is very helpful. Public Works staff has a lot of experience in these situations.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is to the CAO, Mr. White. Is there any assistance for these homeowners flooding?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni. Certainly, the homeowners should be exhausting their own insurance coverage if that's what they have. And I know certainly through my own experience that the insurance companies have brought in a lot of extra staff from outside the community to help get through the claims quickly. We are having discussions with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. There sometimes is a program that the province may choose to implement to assist any homeowners who don't have insurance coverage. We expect to have some indication from the ministry soon whether such a plan may be entertained by the ministry. But again, I must emphasize this is for people who don't have any insurance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a follow-up on Councillor Bruni's question to Mr. Elliott. The EA, he named a bunch of streets that were captured by it. Most of the, not all of them, but most of the calls that Councillor Hilsinger and I received during and after the flooding on last Monday was from the Beaumont, Chatfield, Greenfield area. Would those be captured, would recommendations on drainage improvements for that area be captured by the EA that Councillor Bruni was referencing?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, the whole drainage area is going to be looked at, and we'll start wherever the top of that is, and that's all within that same area. So yes, that's part of the study.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, only one other comment, not a question, and it's just a thanks to our public works staff and our engineering staff. I know that they've certainly replied to a number of emails from me and phone calls from me over the last week. I know that Councillor Hilsinger has sent a number, and I'm sure they've been getting inundated from calls and emails from all of us. So they're on top of the file, and all their hard work is appreciated.
Okay, we can move to proclamations now, please.
Under Agenda Item 5.1, Northern Ontario Italian Ladies Auxiliary Week, Edith Simon, the president of the Electra Marconi Society, and Joyce Milligan, member, are in attendance.
Welcome to council.
Thank you. Mayor Provenzano, City Council, and City staff, good afternoon. My name is Ida Simon. I am president of the Electra Marconi Ladies Society. On October 18th, 19th, and 20th, we, the Electra, will be hosting the 56th NOILA Convention at the Marconi Cultural Centre. NOILA stands for Northern Ontario Italian Ladies Auxiliary, which was first established on June the 5th, 1963, at the Caruso Club in Sudbury. Delegates from Timmins, North Bay, Coppercliff, Sudbury, and the Sioux will come together in sisterhood to celebrate our heritage, culture, language, and yes, our delicious food. The purpose of NOILA is to exchange ideas, projects, and fundraisings which we donate back to the community. One great idea that came forth was the awarding of a scholarship to a son or daughter of the hosting club. Each club donates an amount to the scholarship fund to financially assist the recipient. The Electra takes great pride in our beautiful city, friendly city, and we welcome all and embrace all delegates with open arms to join us in celebrating Noila Week, October 14th to the 20th. Thank you.
I have a proclamation here for you. Whereas the formal establishment of Noila, Northern Ontario Italian Ladies Auxiliary, took place in Sudbury on June 5th, 1963, with 7 clubs present. And whereas the formal introduction of Noila occurred in Sudbury, Ontario on the second Saturday of September in 1965. Whereas the organization is expanded, consisting of a cohesive group of women of all nationalities, working together to encourage the active participation of women in political, social, and economic positions in their communities, and to promote and preserve the Italian language, culture, and heritage. And whereas the 56th convention will be taking place here in Sault Ste. Marie on October 18th through October 20th, with auxiliary members coming to join in the celebrations. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim October 14th to October 20th, 2019, as Northern Ontario Italian Ladies Auxiliary Week, in recognition of the benefits received through the work of women around the globe and in the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mayor.
Under Agenda Item 5.2, Access to Justice Week, Catherine Ordachuk and Mona Jones, members of the Access to Justice Committee, are in attendance.
Welcome to Council.
Thank you.
Ane Bojo, good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilors, city staff, guests in the gallery, and TV and online viewers. My name is Mona Jones, and I am here with Catherine Odzik, Gwen McDonald, and Kate Tomlinson. We're all members of the Access to Justice Committee. We're in attendance today for you, Mr. Mayor, to request that you and your council to proclaim October 28th to November 1st Access to Justice Week. The local Access to Justice Committee convened in August 2018, and this is our second year to organize an event for Sault Ste. Marie and the Algoma District. We are many individuals that work in the justice and school system in different capacities. We have members from the local judiciary, lawyers from the Algoma Bar, the Crown Attorney's Office and Community Legal Clinic, the Catholic and public schools, as well as mediation services and court administration staff. The purpose of the event is to educate and engage youth in justice events, activities, and issues. The committee is organizing a one-day event for grade 7 and 8 students to take place during Access to Justice Week, specifically on Tuesday, October 22nd.
The committee has sent out invitations to the Sault and Algoma District English and French school boards for students to participate in the event promoting and celebrating access to justice during Access to Justice Week. It will take place at the Sault Ste. Marie Courthouse, where local justice sector's partners will make brief presentations at various stations set up in the courthouse, and they will be available for questions from the students about the justice system and our particular organizations, or the agency's particular role in providing services and towards access to justice in the system.
We are anticipating that this event will provide our young people, and specifically grades 7 and 8, and I believe we have 120 students in the morning and 120 students in the afternoon. If you don't see us anymore, you'll understand why, which gives them an excellent opportunity to learn about and understand their justice system. And we look forward to staging this event at the courthouse on October 22nd. In this way, we hope to provide a meaningful contribution to access to justice. To that end, Mr. Mayor, would you kindly read the proclamation for Access to Justice Week?
Happily. Whereas Access to Justice Week is celebrated across the province of Ontario and strives to increase public awareness of the diverse justice stakeholder organizations present across the province and in our community. Whereas Access to Justice Week aspires to ensure all persons have a better understanding of how to access the justice system and to better understand how it functions. And whereas various groups and organizations that are dedicated to helping people to access, navigate, and utilize the justice system will be available to provide information to students attending the Sault Ste. Marie District Courthouse on Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019. Whereas the Access to Justice event serves to ultimately strengthen our community and bring the community together to acknowledge and embrace the unique role that the justice system plays in our community. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim October 28th to November 1st, 2019 as Access to Justice Week, and invite members of the community to celebrate access to justice in our community and across the province during the proclaimed Access to Justice Week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Under Agenda Item 5.3, Scare Hunger, Judith Kovala, Dealership Operations with Maitland Motors, and student representatives Avi Bowman and Sarah Van Roen are in attendance.
Welcome to council.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Provenzano and City Council. We're here this evening to talk a little bit about scaring hunger in our community this month. So behind me, we have a variety of students and teachers and parents who are part of this initiative from schools all across the city. And with me are two students from the WE Club at St. Mary's College. So I have Sarah and Avi, and they're going to talk a little bit more about scaring hunger.
Can you imagine how tough it would be to get through your day-to-day life constantly being hungry? How about dealing with the stress of not knowing where your next meal will come from? The reality is that this is a real issue in Canada. We Charity empowers people of all ages to make a difference, both domestically and internationally, through programs like We Schools and We Villages. We Schools participate in programs like Scare Hunger to empower youth with the skills, knowledge, and motivation to create positive change in themselves and the world. Since 2015, Maitland Ford and some of the We Schools partnered to initiate this vital community hunger movement through a variety of initiatives and the dedication of many students, teachers, and parents. Over 30,000 non-perishable food items were collected and delivered to all of our food banks in Sault Ste. Marie.
The We Recognize Schools have teamed up with Maitland Ford Lincoln for the 5th year this year. Events for this year's We Scare Hunger include 4 collections outside of Rome's and Pino's grocery stores and outside of 2 Greyhound games. Some schools will be taking the incentive to run their own events, including a paper bag collection in local neighborhoods and dress-down days to urge the collection of canned food items. Maitland Ford will be calling on local businesses to compete to collect the most non-perishable food items. Food items can be dropped off at any of the We Schools or Maitland Ford. Once all the non-perishable items have been collected over the month, they will be delivered to all of our food banks. Each month, more than 850,000 Canadians turn to food banks for help. More than 1/3 of these individuals are children and youth. Not having access to affordable, nutritious foods at an early age is associated with childhood mental health problems and also increases the risk of asthma and depression. Hunger is not always easy to spot, but just because you can't always see it, that doesn't mean that it's not affecting the people around you.
So just some more fast facts on a local basis. 1 in 10 families use food banks in Sault Ste. Marie. James Street Community Soup Kitchen provided 22,000 meals in 2018. 2,700 families used the Good Food Box program in 2018. The Salvation Army helps between 260 to 280 families per month, and their drop-in center serves 24,000 to 28,000 visits in a year. In 2018, St. Vincent served 2,944 hot meals, 704 being children. Join us in our mission to scare away hunger. Come together and collect food in your community. It doesn't take a big commitment to make a big impact. Your involvement can be as simple as making a donation or spreading the word. Donations also will be accepted at the schools or at Maitland Ford from October 1st to October 31st. Mayor Provenzano, would you please read the proclamation for Scare Hunger Month?
Gladly. Whereas more than 85,000 Canadians rely on the support of food banks every month, and children make up more than 1/3 of that number, and these people come from all walks of life. And whereas 1 in 10 households in Sault Ste. Marie is food insecure, whereas some people need support over longer periods, but most require help only occasionally for a short period. Hunger leads to long-term health conditions, especially in young children, and is a barrier to academic success. Whereas for a 5th year in a row, Maitland Ford Lincoln has worked in partnership with Algoma We Recognized Schools across the city of Sault Ste. Marie, St. Basil, St. Mary's College, St. Paul, Holy Family, St. Mary's French Immersion, and Sioux College to collect non-perishable food as part of WE's National Month-Long Scare Hunger Food Drive, distributing the donations to local food banks. Whereas the We Scare Hunger Food Drive is just one example of how the local community of Sault Ste. Marie comes together to work to make a difference in the lives of those that they serve. Now therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim October 1st to October 31st, 2019 as Scare Hunger Month and invite all members of the community to take part in Scare Hunger Month and work together and raise awareness of the hunger needs in our community. Thank you, and thank you, young ladies, and all the other students here with you. It's important that you get involved like this, so thank you for doing that.
Under Agenda Item 5.4, Christmas Cheer 2019, Diane Marshall, convener, is in attendance.
Welcome to Council, Ms. Marshall.
Welcome, and welcome, Council and Mayor. This ties in so well with the last group that is Scare Hunger, and this is with Christmas Cheer. And Christmas Cheer this year will be 50 years old, and it used to be handled by the city's welfare department, and then in '69, they worked with the Maycourt Club, and they developed the Christmas Cheer program. So this is our 50th year that we have been operating. And we have a challenge right at the moment. We have no building this year, and we are on the hunt. In fact, I likely am on a number of surveillance cameras as I've gone around buildings and peered in windows and driven around the parking lots, and we still haven't come up with any buildings. We need a building of approximately 8,000 to 10,000 square feet. That's a large building, but it's a large operation. We service it will be December the 18th this year, between 1,600 and 1,800 families. And that the cost of the program is approximately $100,000, and that is completely funded through the Santa Claus Fund, the Sault Ste. Santa Claus Fund. We have a number of passionate volunteers. I call them Santa's senior elves because they're all, most of them are retired. We begin, hopefully, the middle of November. But as I said, we do not have a building. And we, in the past, have used warehouses, vacant schools, abandoned grocery stores. You name them, we've been there, and we make them work. The problem we have is that school boards are selling their schools, and they're being converted to condos and wonderful office buildings, and some are pending sales right now. And we had a lovely home last year at Sears, but right now we have the spirit of Halloween in there. So they're taking that space. So we're coming to you, sharing our challenge, because this is a program that is well respected in the community. It makes a difference. We call it Making the Magic Happen for families in need. And as I said, we have between 1,600 and 1,800 families that are impacted by Christmas cheer. So I would just like to leave you with that thought, and hopefully you can reach me anytime and any hour as well. I don't mind. And but we hope eventually to have a permanent home. United Way are the trustees for Christmas cheer. And hopefully down the road, we will have a permanent building that we can share up at Harvest Algoma and with that program up. And so they're ready to do that, but we need the money to build a building. So I thank you very much for this time, and I'll gladly answer any questions that you might have. Sandra?
We'll start with Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I'm glad you came to basically share your challenge, and I'm sure someone in our community will hopefully reach out. But How do we get a hold of you? Is there an email address?
You
Just
can
for the
call
viewers at
United Way
home.
office and they'll forward it, or my number is.
For the viewers at home, you never know.
Yeah,
Okay, so the United Way office, is that right?
yes.
That would be fine.
They can also call my office. We've been
Yeah.
working and trying to support the good work of Christmas Cheer. It's an important institution in our community. They do a tremendous amount of work every year. You are a strong leader of that, and you've given back to
thank
our
you.
community 100 times over, so I thank you for that. And the idea of this message was just to get the information out to the broader
Awareness.
community that we have been looking for a place unsuccessfully, and we need space to run Christmas Cheer this year. So I ask all the counselors, put your thinking caps on, talk to people that you might know, and anybody out there that might see some or know of some good space. If you can give Diane Marshall a call, or if you don't have her number, you can give my office a call and we'll connect you with Diane, or you can give the United Way a call and they'll connect you with Diane.
Right.
But thank you for all
Thank
the good
you.
work you do,
Thank
Diane.
you very much.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us, I think, to the consent agenda.
Yes, it does.
So council, we are on the consent agenda. Do we have matters on the consent agenda? Councillor Gardy.
6.10, Mr. Provenzano, the ride sharing.
6.10. Go ahead.
It's great that it's back. I think it's timely considering some of the news with one of our current cab companies ending service. And I just have a few questions. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to, is it Mrs. Field?
That's correct.
So this bylaw was to amend 2011-161. There's no mention in the bylaw, as I read it, of the number of hours for which a driver could work consecutively. I would assume it's in 2011-161, but for the public, how many hours could a driver work consecutively as a ride share provider?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, I don't have that answer with me. I will endeavor to get that to you.
Okay, thank you. I know the City of Toronto and a couple of others in Ontario, they can drive for 12 hours and then the app shuts off for 6 and then they can continue again. I think that's kind of important for safety. Speaking of safeties, how often, so the public is aware, how many hours, or sorry, how many kilometers, or what's the time frame in terms of how often a car would have to be provided with some safety assurance to the city? Do we know that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, you're asking when does it have to be?
Like every year, every so many kilometers, does the driver have to be able to prove that the vehicle is safe to transport people?
Yes, it has to fit within certain parameters. So it has to have a safety. It can be stopped by police and have to produce that. The car can't be older than 5 years old. There are certain particulars that are set out in it.
Okay. It states that the drivers have to be at least 18 years of age. I was just wondering how that compared to other communities in the province in terms of, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, we did take a look at a number of the bylaws in different communities, and 18 seems to be the date that Hamilton, Thunder Bay, and I think Ottawa use from the ones that we looked at.
Thank you. And just 2 or 3 more. Will there be designated pickup spots for locations where we would assume there would be busier events going on, i.e. after a Greyhound game or an event going on at the GFL Center, GFL Memorial Gardens? Would they be using the same kind of pickup and drop-off areas as taxis?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, no, they will not. They are specifically not requested to do a hail service or to use like a taxi stand, so that for safety purposes, they can only connect through the app so that they get a quote for the amount, they get a receipt, and they will be contacted by who the person is that will pick them up. So people won't be inadvertently getting into a car that,
Correct, but in any of the research that you did in preparation for this, are there communities that have certain locations for kind of those types of locations within their community where they kind of exclude rideshare drivers from, to kind of alleviate the opportunity for there to be some kind of backup in traffic or something like that? Because I believe there are some communities that there are certain areas where they're prohibited from picking people up in busier parts of their community.
they are, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Gardy, they are excluded from being at, for example, a taxi stand where other taxis will be there waiting for patrons.
Okay, winter tires, will they be required?
I do not have that answer. I would assume that when we put this in place with a checklist, we'll go through a safety checklist of what's required, and as those inspections are being done, the inspections will list that.
Okay, that's everything for me. Thank you.
Councillor Shoemaker, on the same matter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, City Solicitor, for bringing this report back. Once the bylaw is passed, which will be tonight, hopefully, when, like, does the regulatory framework go into place, as of tomorrow? When could someone realistically start driving for a rideshare company if one wanted to start operating here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we'd have to have a rideshare company show interest or want to open up an industry here. And then from there, that company would have to have people that were interested and then go through their recruitment process. They can't just start tomorrow type thing. So they'll have to have all the things in place before they'll be allowed to have a license to drive.
Well, let's assume that happens. I think Councillor Shoemaker's question is, what will have to happen on our end? This bylaw passes. Let's say that somebody comes tomorrow and says, hey, I want a rideshare, and they have the agreement from one of the rideshare companies that they could do that. Could we license that? How long will it take us to get our act in order so we can start licensing this?
That licensing goes through the police services, just like taxi. So as fast as we could turn that around, I would say probably to go through the process, the licensing, the inspections of the cars, that wouldn't be done in a day or two, but it could be in a short period of time.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, it would not be unrealistic for it to be done, at next month or the month following police services meeting?
That's correct. From what I understand, there is at least one rideshare company that is waiting for us to have this in place so that they can approach.
Yes, I believe you are probably referring to U-Ride. I believe you met with Mr. Roberto, the owner of it, during the drafting of this as a stakeholder?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and he has, or has he, I guess the question is, has he expressed some interest in establishing here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, he has. He is right now in Thunder Bay, North Bay, I think Sudbury, and they are looking at the Sioux, so he has interest here.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate this report coming back.
Anybody else on ride sharing? Councillor Gardy, do you have anything else on the consent agenda?
Not at this time.
Councillor Christian and then Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions about 6.5 interest arbitration award. I'm going to direct my Mr. Miro authored this report, so I'll direct my questions to him, although Mr. Johnson's here as well. But I just want to start off by clarifying that the arbitration award now brings us current to 2018, correct?
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, Yes, 2018 with a Me Too condition waiting for a police settlement.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. Just for clarity, what does Me Too mean?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, whatever the wage increase for police services uniform would be applied to our collective bargaining agreement for that particular year.
So is that for every year, or is it just something that you do periodically after you've negotiated these contracts, where at the end you say there's a spread, so we have to adjust it at some point? Is that how it works?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, because historically we have been tied to and related to and compared to city police, which is not uncommon, even though it may not be a popular thing. It may not be it's not uncommon across the province to have that relationship.
Right.
We have had coexisting agreements that live the same timeline that required adjustment to maintain the decision to have $100 of difference between first-class constables and first-class firefighters.
Okay,
In this particular case, there was no in-force collective agreement timeline to match up with our particular award. Therefore, the arbitrator decided that when and if a settlement is deemed appropriate for that particular year for police,
right,
that wage adjustment will be similarly implemented.
I think, one second, there's a bit of a simpler answer in that, like, police was determined for the years until the end of 17. So this award goes to the end of 17. Police wage increase is not determined for 18. So
Right.
once it's determined for 18, that is what fire will get for 18.
So,
There's
I
parity
get
between
that.
police and fire.
I appreciate both explanations. I guess my next question would be then, why bother negotiating salaries if we're just waiting for the police to settle? Why do we spend time in arbitration arguing over wages when they're simply going to get what police are getting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the hopeful answer is that now there are changes to the FPPA, the Fire Prevention and Protection Act, that are more sympathetic to a more reasonable outcome than historically has been the case. In addition, the timing of the collective agreements, because they haven't always been, and quite frankly, they've seldom been in line with one another, it requires us under the Ontario Labour Relations Act to actually enter into a bargaining session.
That's reasonable. I appreciate that. Just a couple more questions, if I might. So I see that we have a schedule of pay increases, but then I see down below, in addition to the above, wages retroactive were awarded any positions receiving a percentage of first-class firefighters. And I understand why there's those percentages there, because you don't want compression between a first-class officer and management. I get that. But why is this, have these percentages jumped? Are those new percentages?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, yes. They've all increased. Some are new. Two have stayed the same.
Right.
But the majority that you see there are increases that are
Percentage-wise?
on average 2%. Well, I can go down the list for you, but on average it's a 2% hike.
Why is that?
So, wait one second.
Why the percentage increase?
I need to understand this. 2% gross, like, as in captain went from 115 to 117?
Correct,
Or
Mr. Mayor.
2% of 115? No, it's 2% of.
Correct.
An additional 2%
An
on
additional.
top.
Why, what's the justification? I understand why you have them in there. You want to keep the spread, right? And as a first-class officer's wage goes up, the dollar amount, although the spread is the same, the percentage, the dollar amount increases just by using simple math.
Sure.
So what's the justification in asking for an additional 2% on top of the spread they already have?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I'm at a loss to give you a justification. I can just tell you that normative and pervasive in the province, the associations have been very successful in garnering additional increases above a normal general wage increase. I can't justify it to you. I can't justify it to council or the citizens of Sault Ste. Marie, but I can tell you it's unfortunately,
it's the normal.
It's the norm, and I want to be careful when I say the norm, because I'm not sitting here accepting the norm. I'm just saying that's what is occurring in the province of Ontario.
So just to be clear, hypothetically, say a captain, if first class sees a 2% increase, then the captain will see a 2% increase plus the additional 2% on that new spread.
Right.
So he's looking at a 4% increase.
So the general wage increase applies to the entire grid.
Yep.
And then you apply the first class percentage in addition to the new base rate. So I neglected to answer Councillor Dufour in an email asking for particulars because it's a very complex process and our payroll department is inundated with 3 collective agreements and a multi-tiered retroactive calculation. That's why I apologize to Councillor Dufour for not being able to get him exact figures. But basically, that's correct. You have a general wage increase, and then you throw in adjustments to your first class percentage of first class firefighter, and then you go back, and then every time the new wage increases, the base rate, you have to do another calculation, and then apply whatever changes may have applied to your first class percentage.
Now, all fire departments, from what I understand, have the 369 retention clause. Is that fair to say? Most of them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that is accurate.
Okay. So how long does a firefighter have to be there to earn the extra 9%? How many years?
Sorry, Councillor Christian, Mr. Nero, maybe you could explain for the benefit of people that are watching that wouldn't know what it is, what 369 is.
So 369 is a graduated, what started out to be a retention pay incentive that jurisdictions, predominantly in Southern Ontario, were basically stealing from one another, stealing staff. Neighboring municipalities where you're able to drive obviously offered more money, and therefore there was an issue with staffing. So the associations became quite adept in trying to resolve that problem and started proposing retention bonuses. So 3% for your first 6 years, 6%, another 6, 9%, another 6. So you see 6, 12, 18 progression.
Okay.
That was to refrain the borrowing, the stealing, the hopping around between municipalities that were in close proximity to one another. That was sort of a facade because in essence there wasn't really a whole lot of that kind of transition going on. So when that was raised through various municipalities and our provincial working groups to say, well, that's not really an issue. Retention is not an issue. Certainly isn't an issue in Northern Ontario, in Sault Ste. Marie and the northern communities. But even so, in Southern Ontario, where they alleged it to be happening, it really wasn't the case. So then they evolved into calling it service pay. So now you see it referred to as service pay. So you get rewarded. The longer you stay employed, there's a token bonus applied to your wages.
So that being said, I just want to understand this because it's a little confusing for me. So let's assume a captain has been there for 18 years. He's getting a 2% raise, a 2% bump up with the new spread, and a 9% raise because he's been there for 18 years.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that is correct.
So let me see. That's 13%.
13%.
It's a 13% raise. Okay. One final question. What does a first-class officer make, by the way, with the new contracts?
I can tell you that. Or can I tell you that? I believe it's in the neighborhood of 98,000 annually.
Okay, 98. Oh, sorry, I did have one more question. I see that the training officer, the public education officer, has been red circled. And my understanding of the public education officer is it's sort of the new phase that we're getting into in terms of prevention, fire prevention, et cetera. Is there a reason why that particular position is red circled?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, through our last administration, last chief, there was a hiring process, and there was a fee associated, a salary associated with that position.
Right.
We thought during bargaining that 115% of current salary was a little bit out of the norm. We tried to get it in line with some of the similar positions that we mentioned. And I do want to be careful on how much I get into it with this one position, because I don't want to identify anyone in public. But that position, I think the chief will tell you, has some meaningful work to do. But we think the better comparator was the fire prevention officer position. To your point, Councillor Christian, they were more in line with the duties and the responsibilities that we would require of the position.
Well, I thank you for answering those. It's a little confusing. I just wanted some clarification. Thank you.
Any other councillor questions or comments on that? Councillor Gardy?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Nero. Mr. Nero, just for the public, and forgive me if this was done and already as Councillor Christian's series of questions to you, but for the public, could you please just outline the wage differentials and how they compare to a first-class firefighter? So for captain, platoon chief, training officer, et cetera. Please and thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, basically you're looking at a 17% difference. On $100,000, it would be $17,000 if you use an average of $100,000 wage. So those percentages would be as you see them.
So platoon chief 125%, training officer 125%, correct?
Correct.
Fire prevention officer 110% of $100,000. Public education officer 115%. Administrative assistant 57%. Support services, which I don't necessarily totally understand, so I'd ask for some clarification on that one, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. So this was a new stepped increase that we were fortunate enough to actually get awarded in this most recent pass. Temporary savings because we started at a lower percentage. And I say temporary because at some point you are going to catch up to the max. But certainly we were thankful for that little tidbit that at least graduated the increase. So that's why you see that it's brand new. We've never had that stepped process before.
Perfect. And then I think the final one you had listed was support services mechanic at 97%, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I think this question is more for Shelley Shell.
Jake will answer it.
Sure, I'll try my best here.
Okay. Thank you. Our budget is coming up soon, but can you just, for the viewers at home and refresh our memories, firefighters and police, firefighters, what percentage of the overall budget is basically goes towards the firefighters, our municipality budget? Would you know the answer?
Are you talking just salaries themselves or the department overall?
I
don't have it right in front of me. I could get that to you, but.
Okay. Just curious, if you can get back to me on that, that would be helpful. And I'm looking
So
for.
Councillor Hollingsworth, the chief might be looking to answer that.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. If it's the overall budget, like Mr. Brzee said, it's about 10.5% of the total budget of the city.
10.5% of the total budget, the Sault Ste. Marie budget. Is that what I just heard?
Yeah, but that's not just salaries and wages, that's the entire operating budget.
Okay. And out of your budget, your department budget, what percentage would be salaries?
Well, we're about 93% of my budget is salaries and benefits.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, council? I'm going to make just a remark about this because it's comments I've made to council in closed, comments I've made to the chief and staff, and I just think that it's responsible of me to make comments in public that I've made in private. I want to start by recognizing explicitly that I think that police officers and firemen and all of our personnel at the fire department and all of our responders to emergencies, including paramedics, are incredibly important. And I recognize that they have very difficult jobs. I spend a lot of time with police services, as Councillor Bruni has and as Councillor Hilsinger has. And, when we had that big fire on Queen Street, Chief, like your guys worked incredibly hard and fought back what was really a difficult situation. So I don't want any of my comments to diminish the importance that I recognize in fire, and police and our paramedics. The challenge we have, though, is the cost of providing our emergency services is rising at a much quicker rate than our revenues are. And we're going to get to a point where it's going to be very hard to afford the provision of emergency services. There's parity between fire and police, so there's a nexus there, there's a connection. And there's an argument on behalf of the paramedic side that they should have parity with fire and police. And you can understand those arguments. You can look at our call volumes on paramedics, and you know that paramedics have very difficult jobs. So paramedics might well be successful in that argument and might well get parity with fire and police at some time. But if a first-class firefighter is now making $98,000, and when you look at this scale, you see the scale, the percentages of that are all, with the exception of the administrative assistant and the support mechanic, in excess of 100% of that salary. It's very easy to see that most people working in fire are in excess of $100,000, and the majority of the people working in police are in excess of $100,000. And part of that is because they have difficult and challenging jobs. But the reality is that we don't have the revenue models as a municipality, particularly one that doesn't have a growing assessment, to keep up with these costs. And what I'm concerned about is we're going to get to a point where some very difficult decisions are going to have to be made. And I don't want to get to that point. I want to find a way to work with our employee base to find solutions so that we can continue to afford these services on a long-term basis. But when you look at, and Councillor Christian illustrated this, a scenario where someone's salary might increase 13 or 14% in 1 year, that isn't sustainable. And in this model, we have an annual adjustment, and then we have an adjustment in the ratio rates, I'll call them, and then we have the 369 that factors in, which is the service pay, formerly retention pay. And I really think that this is a challenge the municipality, like municipalities across Ontario, has to be much more mindful of and much more active in resolving in a responsible manner. Because it's not going to change unless we make some effort to address it. And the reality is that the services, notwithstanding their importance, are not very far away from become services that is going to be very difficult for us to afford. And we have some responsibility to acknowledge that reality, and we have some responsibility to have active discussions with our partners and amongst ourselves to try and find some solutions to this. Because it can't keep on keeping on where every year automatically it is 2+, 2+, 2+, whatever the rest of the jump is. Chief, 93% of your budget is human resource costs. So if you think about that, you have the responsibility of figuring out how to run a fire service with 7%. And I think one of your trucks costs, we're getting close to $900,000 now. Yeah. So there's not much money left over to run the fire service. And we have the same challenge up at the police service. Our budget for 2020 is just a shade under $29 million. And they're challenges that we have to acknowledge and they're challenges that we have to face, but we need help from our union partners to face them properly. Sooner or later, the council is going to be in a position where they're going to have to make very difficult decisions about this unless we get out in front of it. Those are my comments. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Councillor Christian, Councillor Shoemaker, you were next. Oh, do we have to? Yeah, so, yeah, it's 5:29, so we'll go to planning. Councillor Shoemaker, I'll come to you when we're done planning. Madam Clerk, if we can go to the planning.
Okay, under agenda item 7.7.1, A1119 said 412 Second Line West and 236 Prentice Avenue. There's a motion by Councillors Nero and Hilsinger resolved that the report of the senior planner dated October 7, 2019 concerning application A1119Z be received and that the application be postponed indefinitely until the applicant submits a finalized proposal to planning staff.
Mr. Tenazzo, you can speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an L-shaped parcel with frontage on Prentice Avenue as well as Second Line West. The recommendation is to postpone this matter indefinitely, and those are my submissions.
Okay, and that is a request of the applicant?
No, this is a request of staff at this point.
Is the applicant agreeable to this?
I believe, yes, the applicant's not here tonight, but is agreeable. They're spending some additional time looking at alternative designs and the costs associated with those designs.
Okay, before we get to questions, is there anybody here on behalf of the applicant or to speak on behalf of the application? Is there anybody here to speak against the application or the postponement of the application? Seeing none, we had some questions. We'll start with Councillor Scott, then Councillor Nero. Councillor Scott's mic, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to, I guess, Mr. Tanazo. I guess my big hang-up on this is I went to the open house. I saw the design. To me, and keep in mind I'm no planning expert, I just don't understand why we're so insistent that we change it to 2 units of 3 rather than 1 whole unit of 6. It seems to fit the area. It seems to be similar to some other units that were built like in the same area, like 50 meters down the road. There's support from the neighbors. We had one person, I believe, come to the meeting in objection, but he was fine with it with the site plan control to make sure that the drainage was right. I guess what I'm saying is it's really discouraging to see that a young developer was trying to get this on the go, and it's just, to me, it sounds like staff kind of got in his way, and I was kind of hoping the thought process for that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, staff certainly prefers the 2-3 unit approach, and there was the applicant, and then there was the applicant's builder, and I believe there was some discussions that needed to continue where the applicant was wanting to go a certain way, but the potential builder or partners were looking at other options as well. So I don't think it's fair to say that it was just staff.
Sorry, maybe that wasn't a fair way to phrase it. It's just from my point of view, it seems that between the applicant and the builder, I've discussed with them, they seem to be in favor of just doing the one big building, and I can't remember who it was when it first came to council that they suggested it being 2. So I was just curious to know, though, why does staff suggest that it be 2 3 units rather than just 1 6 unit?
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, from an urban design standpoint, you alleviate that big wall, like a longhouse type look, and with the 2 units, it actually created a really nice landscaped area in the middle. So it was, from an urban design standpoint, a much nicer, better development.
But the length of the unit wouldn't actually be seen. It's behind homes on Prentice, so you'd only see essentially the width of it from Second Line. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, that you'd see some of it certainly from the rear yards on Prentice. Yes, there is a hedge and there is a buffer, but I think it would be visible, not front and center visible, but certainly still visible, and certainly you'd see it if you lived in that development.
I think that's really all the questions I had on that particular item. Thank you.
Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Mr. Tanazo as well. So when this process, if and when this application comes back, does it start over from step 1? Neighborhood meetings, cost of application again? How do we handle that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, yes. So it does start from step 1 again. We do have a prorated fee schedule if the applicant does come back within a year of this last deferral. They pay quite a reduced fee, but there's a new public notice and the need for another neighborhood meeting.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else on that application? Seeing none, just to be clear, we're voting on the deferral of the postponement of it, sorry. All in favor? Carried. We can move on to 7.7.2, Madam Clerk.
Yeah, I'm just going to close the vote here. Agenda item 7.7.2, A 1719Z, 1274 and 1276 Queen Street East. A motion by Councillors Bruni and Shoemaker. Resolved that the report of the planner dated October 7, 2019 concerning rezoning application A 1719Z be received, and that City Council approve the application and rezone the subject properties from single detached residential zone R2 to single detached residential zone R2S with a special exception to permit a triplex to locate on 1274 Queen Street East and another triplex to locate on 1276 Queen Street East, in addition to the uses currently permitted, subject to the following provisions. 1274 Queen Street East, the required east side yard be reduced from 1.8 to 1.3 meters. 1276 Queen Street East, the required frontage be reduced from 15 to 13.5 meters. The required west side yard be reduced from 3 to 2.75 meters. The required east side yard be reduced from 1.8 to 1.2 meters. And that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect the approval.
Okay. Can we have Mr. Tenazo's mic, please? Mr. Tenazo, you can just give us a synopsis for those folks watching at home, and then we'll get to the application.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is on the north side of Queen Street, just east of Churchill Boulevard. The triplexes have actually existed since the late 60s. They were built illegally by previous owners, and the current owner is hoping to legalize them. Mr. Prentzel is here should council have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Would the applicant like to speak to the matter? Are you Mr. Prentzel? Yeah, would you like to speak to the application, sir? I was a bit confused admittedly when I read it because I'm familiar with those buildings. I drive by them all the time, and I didn't appreciate that they weren't already what they're applying to be. So you're just looking to bring them up to
Yes.
essentially standard with.
I didn't know that there were only duplexes, so.
Yeah, I
I
understand.
just found out a couple of months ago, and I went right to the building department and tried to make it legal.
Okay, well, we appreciate that. Any questions? Anybody else here to speak in favor of the application? Is there anybody here to speak in opposition to the application? Seeing none, all in favor? Well, you are legal, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Under Agenda Item 7.7.3, A1819Z, 90 Chapel Avenue, the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation. It's a motion by Councillors Bruni and Hilsinger. Resolved that the report of the planning intern and senior planner dated October 7, 2019 concerning rezoning application A1819Z be received, and that council approve the application and rezone a southeasterly portion of the subject property, approximately 147 meters by 114 meters, from Parks and Recreation Zone to Medium Density Residential Zone, with a special exception to permit a community hub as an additional permitted use. For the purposes of this bylaw, a community hub shall be defined as an establishment containing programming that serves as a central access point for health, social, cultural, recreational, and other resources. Permit required parking to be located within the required front yard and reduce required parking spaces from 86 spaces to 68 spaces. Further be it resolved that council deem the portion of the subject property proposed to be rezoned as subject to site plan control pursuant to Section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect the approval.
Okay, Mr. Tenazo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the former Rosedale School. The applicant, the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corp., is applying to rezone just the southern half of that property to permit 9 dwelling units, a community hub, and a daycare facility. And Mr. Jeff Barbin is present this evening to speak on behalf of this application.
Mr. Barbin, would you like to make any comments?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I'm here if there's any questions that need to be answered. It's pretty straightforward. Mr. Tenazo outlined clearly what we intend to do with the property.
Okay. Is there anybody else here that wants to speak in favor of the application? Is there anybody here that would like to speak in opposition to the application? Council, do we have any questions on the application? Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Barbin, just so that people are aware, the old Rosedale School will be a community hub with several agencies located, plus a daycare and some housing. Mr. Barbin, can you tell, especially for the people at home, what organizations are going to be within this community hub in that neighborhood?
Currently, Big Brothers and Big Sisters will be operating out of the community hub. Algoma Family Services, social housing will be working out of the community hub. Social services as well will be offering Ontario Works programming out of the hub. We are currently talking to other partners to locate within the hub as well. There will be 9 seniors units that will be occupying the residential portion. There's talks with the senior center to look at offering services for seniors in the area as well. And the hub will continue to grow as we open and see its potential. The daycare will offer currently 49 spaces and can expand to 65.
And the gym that's intact right now, is that staying a gym for the?
The gym will be available, that's correct, for the services that are working out of the building to utilize for their programming.
And the existing hub that you have on Chapel that's in one of the townhomes, will that get converted back into housing once this is operational?
Yes, once the hub is up and running, they'll be vacating the 4-bedroom unit they currently occupy, and then that will be returned to the rent geared to income market.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Shoemaker and then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Barbin. We had reviewed the plans in a meeting prior to this coming forward, and what is in place to ensure that you know the residential units don't interfere with the operations of the daycare?
The daycare currently will be operating across from actually one of the buildings that the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation owns. The school had a larger volume of traffic than the daycare will ever present. So we're not in issue with, if anything, there'll be right now, there'll be a minor increase, but it'll be far less than what we were experiencing when the school had all the busing that was occurring.
Sorry, I meant there's units within this building.
Oh, within the building?
How will they be sort of
Yes,
kept
the
separate?
apartment buildings are actually will be separated from the whole building as far as they will not be connected to the services and to the daycare. Each component will be separated from one another. The 2 residential, or the 9 units actually will have their own entrance. They actually occupy the back. It's a U-shaped building, the back of each building, and each residence will have its own entrance into the apartment space.
Okay, good, thank you. I have a brief comment, just if I may.
We'll circle back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Actually, I just have comments as well.
Well, then you start it off and we'll circle back to Councillor Shoemaker.
Okay. I just want to take this time, there's several of us that sit on the DSAB board, and as chair of the DSAB board, or for those at home, it's the District of Social Services of Goma, Sault Ste. Marie. I want to say thank you to Mr. Barbin, Jeff, and also to Carla, who's also in the gallery. This is one example of creative thinking to basically look at the needs of our community when it comes to housing, but also to looking at childcare and other services that we desperately need in this area to bring it into one unit under one umbrella. So this is well done. And if I may say, DSAB, you have done a lot of great positive projects. And I know that there was more to come, but please take it back to your team that we appreciate hearing this. And thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Yeah, I mean, my comments somewhat echo that. I just think this is a great repurposing of a former school. You know, it intensifies the area. It uses the space for a lot of services that we're short on in town, both daycare spaces, geared to income residential space. So it is just, you know, an all-around, I think, great proposal, and community space for great organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters and others. So, you know, it's just an all-around, I think, great proposal for the area and for the city as a whole.
Anybody else? I think everybody agrees. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Okay, that brings us back to the consent agenda. Councillor Shoemaker, I left off at you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had hopefully two brief items. One was 6.3, vesting of unsold properties.
Understood. Go ahead.
Through you, I guess it would be to Mr. Bruzis. If a property is not sold through the tax sale process, then it comes into the city's hands, and what do we do with it at that point? Oh, Ms. Pascal's here.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. After we vest it in the city's name, we'll look at other opportunities to use the property for city purposes, or look for potential opportunities to sell the property potentially through a real estate.
But if the property didn't sell through a tax sale process, what's our success rate at selling properties once we take them in our name?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I don't have experience. We haven't done this in many years, so I can't answer to the success rate, but we may be able to sell it at a lower price. That's a possibility. In the tax sale process, the minimum bid is the taxes owing, so we could look at potentially selling it at a lower price. It also may be more marketable because prospective buyers under a tax sale can't look at the property.
So, I thought through that too, Councillor Shoemaker, said the same thought, but not everybody who's in the market or might be interested actually follows the tax sale process. There's a property on here on Queen Street that, I thought if you listed that property, you'd probably get an interested party. But the party that would be interested if it was listed might not be paying attention to the tax sale.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, one more item. Potentially, prospective buyers under a tax sale, they have to look at potentially removing someone from the property if there's still someone in the property. Whereas once we vest it, that would be up to us, of course, and then we could sell it, and then a potential buyer wouldn't have that concern.
Okay. Thank you. I see somewhere in this report it talks about that these properties have been inspected and there's no environmental concerns. What kind of inspection does the city do to assure itself of that? Perhaps to Mr. Elliott?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that is essentially just a review of the building file. We look in the building file to see if there's any uses that have been placed in the file that might be of concern. We're not saying the property is clear. We haven't done environmental site assessment, but there's nothing in there that causes us great concern.
And before we vest it in the municipality's name, that is, do we have the opportunity to go in and actually do a ground inspection to ensure that what we see lines up with what's in the building file?
Yeah, I suppose we do, Councillor Shoemaker. I don't know that we do. I haven't done this I don't know that I've done this at all in the past, so I'm not sure exactly what the process is, but I'm sure there'd be an opportunity to, but it may require that we hire an environmental consultant to check that out for us.
Yeah, obviously the taxes are outstanding, so we have to do something with the property, but I just would hate to see us take a property into the municipality's name that then has a bunch of liability associated with it.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker, I understand. Based on the file, based on the known property uses, we don't expect there to be any. It wasn't a gas station, or it wasn't a dry cleaner or something like that. We wouldn't expect there to be anything substantive.
Okay. Well, I guess whatever due diligence you could do is appreciated on that. Those are my questions on that report, Mr. Mayor.
No one else in 6.3? You can go to your second one, Councillor Shoemaker. You're second to last. I'm going to hold you to that.
6.8, I assure you, will be the last. Property standards actions in the Old West End. Through you to Mr. Posbon, I see is here. Mr. Posbon, I see that multiple inspections were done, for the whole area really, and was it 166 actions were required to be taken? 166 inspections were conducted, so I'm not totally understanding your numbers, I guess, is you say finalized inspections 166, number of inspections 82, so Of the properties you did inspect, how many required you to actually do something?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Shoemaker, there was 21 actions that were actually taken through orders. There is that number of inspections, 82, but there are also 84 what we call non-actions, where the property didn't need an inspection recorded at all. That's why you're seeing that little variation number. We could have put that number 84 in to say that no action was required on 84 pieces of property. But there was a total of about 21 actions that were created.
So that, to me, seems like a lot for an area of that size. I see that you're going to go back every couple of years, but how do we avoid letting whole areas of the city fall into such disrepair for such long periods of time that it kind of requires, you know, a concerted effort like we did here?
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Shoemaker, it's a difficult thing to do. I think with a more proactive approach, we can stay more on top of maybe some of the more problematic properties, and hopefully those will migrate to other people following suit to keeping their properties up to standards. With the new task systems that we're involved with, there'll be recommendations put to the task committee on how to deal with these areas, not only Jamestown, but also the downtown area.
Yeah, obviously, there's, I could think of a couple of pockets in town that have kind of more prevalent problems than others, but you've noted in your report that you're going to go back every couple years as a sort of blitz in the area. I assume the answer is no, but does that prevent anyone in the intervening period from bringing issues to your attention as they arise?
No, absolutely not. We're still getting calls on that area.
Okay. And for the two matters that remain in court, I know you probably can't speak too much to the details of them, but are those situations where you've asked the property owner to do something and they haven't?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. And so those properties would remain, for lack of a better word, derelict until the court matter is resolved?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilor Neer on the same matter?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Pozzebon, would it be the intent to move to these pockets, as Councilor Shoemaker has alluded to, on your own, or would you wait for a resolution of council to look at a certain area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero. No, I don't believe so. I think with this task system, there'll be areas that will be identified, and with the addition of an additional bylaw enforcement officer, we'll be able to look at those areas.
So I take it you would use our tracking system, complaint tracking system that would tell you what areas are becoming part of these pockets that are in the same area to look at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero, the system really isn't set up to actually track those kind of activities, unless someone physically, went through each and every street by ward.
So the system, as it stands right now, you would not be able to pull the streets by area, I guess, is what you're saying.
Not by streets in relationship to number of complaints on that street, no.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else on that matter? Seeing none, any other matters in the consent agenda? Councilor Hilsinger?
6.6,
Go
the
ahead.
future Sault Ste. Marie project update.
Mr. Anderson is here. I'm not sure if he'll be taking the questions or Mr. Vera will be.
To Mr. Anderson. Thank you for the report. I noticed that there are 3 action teams for which there was no update provided. So the health team, the education team, and the economic growth and diversity team. There was nothing mentioned in there, and I just wondered if there was a reason for that, or if there's anything to say, nor anything about the community development roundtable in general.
To you, Councillor Hilsinger, through Mr. Mayor. We were trying to be succinct with the report for the most part, so we were just trying to highlight some of the key items. As it pertains to the Education Committee, I can report that we've finalized our priorities for that group. We are looking to move forward with the implementation of those priorities, and same goes for the Economic Growth and Diversification Group. We will be looking at a joint full-bore, I guess, future SSM action team and CDR meeting, likely in November, where we'll review all the priorities and provide updates to those entire groups. But just in terms of brevity, for the sake of the report, we decided not to include that information. We have, with respect to the Health Committee, that's one that we certainly have struggled with in terms of identifying priorities there. I think we are looking to go back to the CDR, most likely to talk about how we address some of the engagement with that group. We're certainly looking at opportunities to include more health and wellness in terms of some of the priorities as a means to address some of the lack of engagement from that file. But we'll have a report and an update on that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. New item?
Oh, okay, sorry. Were you on this same item?
Yeah, but we need to comment if everyone's done with questions.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment on this report. I actually do look forward to getting these reports. It's really helping me see a lot of the work the future SSM does. They're almost like a little hidden gem, so it's nice to see the good work. But there was one particular item that caught my interest that I really liked, and I just wanted to give accolades to the staff on this one, and that was at the end of the little blurb about General Motors Oshawa information session. The fact that we were the only region outside of the GTA that was actively engaged with them trying to recruit the workforce is fantastic. I think that's exactly the kind of work that we need to see, getting more bodies here to fill these jobs. And I was elated to see that. So great work, guys. Thank you very much. This is fantastic. It's good to read.
Thank you. Okay. Those were the extent of your matters, Councillor Hilsinger?
Yes.
Councillor Nero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 6.7, the video board score clock.
Okay.
A question for Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, it appears from the report that once we change this out, there's still 2 faces on that clock that are operable right now. Have we looked at repurposing? Are we able to use those in our other arenas where maybe the score clocks have outlived their time in those arenas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, we're going to be exploring to see if we can use all 4 screens and the digital components aspects within the John Roads 1 and 2, and maybe help support them in Meakin until the Twin Pad arena comes back to council for discussion. So those aspects would be programming for the screens, if that can be done, and then the other digital components will be see how they would align with the infrastructure within both those facilities.
That's great. So there would be a savings of substantial savings if we repurpose those.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, we'd be looking to support the aging infrastructure in those facilities, so that would be a cost avoidance if we're able to use that technology in those buildings.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else on that item? Councillor Bruni.
For Mr. Lamming, so the city will maintain ownership of this clock at the memorial?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, yes, under this agreement, we'd be doing this with the Sioux Greyhounds Club. We'd enter into an RFP arrangement there to post for the securing and the procurement of the clock ends in the installation. We, as the report states, be looking into entering into a 10-year agreement where we would forego our share of the advertising revenue, which is approximately $3,000 per year. And then through the Greyhounds, they'd be securing the advertising arrangements through the individual groups that would be interested in advertising, and then that would go to pay back the clock.
Why would the city have to pay the $500 per event?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, what would happen is, on occasion right now, we do use screens within the facility for certain events. And what would happen is this would be a cost. Instead of using those screens we have to rent right now, you just use the video board. So that would be a cost that would go from that event directly to the Hounds to help with the payback.
And then what about for, say, Sioux Major, girls hockey, ringette, et cetera, if they use the facility? In the report, it says alternative small clock.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, yes, that was recognized right at the onset with the discussion with the Sioux Greyhounds, that they didn't want to impact any of the experience with the minor programming and adult programming that we have. So we have a contingency plan that if it can't be programmed to use for the day use for that type of programming, there'd be a clock secured and posted in the building, similar to what's in place right now at the roads or at the Meekins facility.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else on this matter? See none. Are those your matters, Councilor Nero? Was that the extent of your matters, Councilor Bruni? Any other matters in consent? Seeing none, Madam Clerk.
I have a motion by Councillors Bruni and Hilsinger that all items listed under date October 7, 2019, agenda item 6, consent agenda, be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Carried. That brings us to council resolutions.
Under agenda item 8.1, indoor mausoleum feasibility. Motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Nero, whereas a number of residents have expressed the desire for indoor mausoleums at the city's cemeteries, as can be found in many cities throughout Ontario, and whereas it is prudent for the city to test the demand in the market for indoor mausoleums. Now therefore be it resolved that staff be requested to review the feasibility of indoor mausoleums and attempt through community outreach to gauge the demand that might exist in Sault Ste. Marie for indoor mausoleums and report back to council with a recommendation on whether or not to pursue indoor mausoleums as a future expansion option in Sault Ste. Marie cemeteries.
Okay. Would the mover and seconder like to speak to that? Go ahead. Can we have Councilor Shoemaker's mic, please?
Thank you. Obviously, the report notes that a number of residents have expressed the desire. This is something that kind of comes up oddly frequently in conversation, and I think it's something that other municipalities are doing. So we should look at whether or not it's something feasible for our cemeteries, and whether or not there would be a demand, and if so, whether we should pursue expansion of this type. Right now, we only build what we would call, most people I think would call the wall at the cemetery. But there are lots of other communities in Ontario that have indoor crypt space for urns or caskets. So it's worth looking at, I think, see if there's the potential to expand our cemetery in the future to include indoor crypts.
Councilor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Briefly as well, I think when staff looks at this resolution, I think they should also look at the impact this would have if it ever was built, because some of the people that I've spoken to in regards to this certainly would be interested, but they already have mausoleums, and they certainly would look at the policy that we have in place already, where you could exchange a mausoleum for a newer one. So I think it's very important that we look at that whole impact at that time.
Okay, does anybody else want to comment on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried.
Under agenda item 8.2, Peapatch Access Road, Northern Avenue to Princeton Drive. A motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Hilsinger, whereas the Peapatch Access Road from Northern Avenue to Princeton Drive is slated for completion in the 2022 capital budget, and whereas it may be possible to identify funds at budget time or through underruns in response to requests for tender in the 2020 capital budget to provide for the work to be completed sooner than 2022. And whereas in order to be in a position to complete the work sooner than 2022, the engineering department needs to complete surveying and design works for the Peapatch Access Road. Now therefore be it resolved that the engineering department be requested to complete surveying and design work for the Peapatch Access Road throughout the winter of 2019 so that the project is ready to be completed if funds can be identified in 2020.
Councilor Shoemaker, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I had something a bit more direct and to the point on a previous council agenda, and it ended up being, I think, deferred because there was no hope that it would pass at that time because we weren't discussing the budget. But in speaking with Mr. Elliott after that meeting, really the most critical part of being able to be in a position to construct this road is for the design work to be done, which is all done in-house. So the request is for simply the engineering department to move up the design work so that we are in a position, if funds become available, to complete the road as soon as possible. We've asked the residents of the area to contribute in a number of ways to the improvement of our city. We've added bike lanes on Pine Street. We've done an EA, and this is a recommendation from the EA. And so I think they've given to some degree in terms of what we've asked of them, and perhaps it's time that the municipality and the city work to improve their concerns, which are very legitimate concerns of these very, very difficult traffic situation at Pine and Pleasant, which this is intended and recommended by our traffic engineers to alleviate.
Would you like to speak to it as a seconder? Okay. Councillor Dufour and then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a few comments. I'd like to start by certainly commending my Ward 3 compatriots for the excellent job that they've done advocating for their constituents. But at the same time, I'd like to take this opportunity to advocate for mine and point out that in our capital works budget for 2022, we also have the McDonald Avenue stormwater improvements, which their EA was initiated all the way back in 2015. Now, we heard from Councillor Bruni at the beginning of this meeting about his issues with stormwater improvements in his area, and for me, I'm just, I'm against moving this up. I'm against building new roads when we have other areas that are literally underwater because of a lack of infrastructure, and I think that it's appropriate for us to be following the schedule, and if we are going to debate capital improvements, I think it should be in an inclusive fashion where we are all advocating for the projects and the ward concerns that we see a need for in our areas. So I'm opposed to this motion.
Any other comments on the motion? Oh, sorry, yeah, I indicated you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just a few questions to Mr. Elliott. First of all, I just want to say that the two councillors, Donna Hilsinger and Matt Shoemaker, they do a very good job representing their constituents, and I usually support the councillors when they bring something to the table. However, I just want to clarify a few things. Mr. Elliott, going with Councillor Dufour's comment, in your opinion, is this going to impact any other critical projects such as Sackville? There's been discussion about Sackville being punched through. Can you comment on that particular piece? Will this have an impact? Second question, I think you said, and just clarify, I think you said that this is just going to be done in-house. It's just going to be basically an EA, some research to get it shelf ready. And it's my understanding that we don't really say it's going to definitely happen tonight. It's just going to be shelf ready so that when the budget's discussed, we can have better details and better budget ideas.
Mr. Mayor to Council Hollingsworth, your first question on Sackville. Sackville is going to be a two-phase project. We have a ravine to cross, and we'd like to put that works in the ground before the road is done. That early works is in the capital plan that I gave you to council last meeting for 2021, and the road is scheduled for 2023. So the two phases of the work for the Sackville extension are in the proposed capital works plan. So this doesn't really affect that. Your second question is on process. The EA is complete for this. There's no additional study that's required. It's staff doing a pre-engineering study in the field prior to the snow. And because it's likely a project that we would just design ourselves, then that's work. It's part of our winter work for our engineering technicians and technologists. And they'll complete that design during the winter, and then that's shelf ready for whenever we tender it.
Okay, thank you. So just a clarification, you're just basically doing your research. So if we accept it tonight, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means that you're getting it shelf ready for the potential future if we identify funds, correct?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes, that's the wording of the resolution.
Okay, so we're being proactive. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction to be made. The resolution doesn't actually bump the project up to the 2020 season. Although, if the work's done, I expect if Councilor Shoemaker and Councilor Hilsinger see an opportunity to bump the work up, that will be their next step. But one thing doesn't necessarily lead to the other. So you could support this motion to instruct them to do the work, but ultimately, in the end, I'm in a position where it's difficult for me to support any bumping of any work up in any of your wards, because once you do it once, the argument carries to all the other wards. So I find the idea of bumping it up a lot more difficult than the idea of telling engineering to do some work in their department, a little earlier than they would. It's a lot easier to take. So where I might accept this, it would be harder. It would be a harder threshold, I think, when we get to make the ultimate decision. You'd have to ultimately find the money without displacing another project from another ward, from my perspective. Councilor Nero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the same vein, my question was going to be that we're approving that the work be done at no cost, but if we want to bump this up, it's at budget time.
Yeah. At no cost, I think we should just be careful at no cost.
Well,
At no consulting or an external cost, but, we have our internal human resource costs.
Right, it's staff time. But I think, again, and I agree, the important thing is that for this to move forward, it would have to happen during the budget. I would believe that it's too soon for this budget coming up.
You are not moving it forward. You are not moving the project forward and putting the project in the 2020 year. You're just moving the advanced work that the engineering staff would do forward.
Expenditure of the sum 500,000 would have to happen out of budget.
That's right.
Okay.
That's a separate discussion.
Right.
I imagine the mover and seconder of the resolution planned it that way. Yeah. Any other comments on it? So, Councilor Dufour?
Okay, so my question then to Mr. Elliott is, if other ward councillors had projects that they wanted to move up from future years in the capital budget, would their process then be to bring forward a similar resolution to have pre-design work done ahead of time in order that their projects also be shelf ready, I believe you put it?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, yes, I would qualify that by saying it should be, to be the same as this, it would be an internal project that's being done inside as opposed to a project that require us to procure a consultant for design.
Understood, thank you.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? So.
Can I get you to?
Yeah, so you have to click on your tap pads. I think it carried.
Councillor Christian? Yeah, are you for or against?
Against.
And Councillor Hollingsworth?
Against.
Tied vote.
So it fails. It tied. So just so we can read that off so the public sees. So Councillor Gardy against, Councillor Hilsinger for, Councillor Dufour against, Councillor Vezoellen is not here, Councillor Bruni.
She's a conflict.
For, yeah, she has a conflict. Councillor Scott against, Councillor Shoemaker for, Councillor Christian against, Councillor Nero for, Councillor Hollingsworth against, Mayor Provenzano for. Motion fails.
So we'll move to bylaws. I have a motion by Councillors Bruni and Hilsinger resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date October 7, 2019, save and accept bylaws 2019-196, 2019-197, 2019-198, and 2019-199 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
I'll read those ones separate. Those are all as a result of conflicts. I'll read them separately.
Okay.
Bylaw 2019-198. That's with respect to the 1 foot by 1 foot strip of land at 1 McGregor Avenue. A motion by Councillors Gardy and Hilsinger. Resolved that bylaw 2019-198 being a bylaw to authorize the acquisition of property being a 1 foot by 1 foot strip of lands located at 1 McGregor Avenue be passed in open council the 7th day of October 2019.
All in favor? Carried.
Bylaw 2019-197, declaring the city property abutting 1 McGregor Avenue as surplus. A motion by Councillors Nero and Hilsinger. Resolved that bylaw 2019-197 being a bylaw to declare the city-owned property legally, well, it's abutting 1 McGregor Avenue as surplus to the city needs and to authorize the disposition of the said property be passed in open council the 7th day of October 2019.
All in favor? Carried.
Bylaw 2019-199, Sioux North Holdings operating as Great Lakes Honda. Motion by Councillors Bruni and Hilsinger. Resolved that bylaw 2019-199 being a bylaw to declare city-owned property as surplus to the city's needs and to authorize the disposition of the said property to Sioux North Holdings Limited operating as Great Lakes Honda be passed in open council the 7th day of October 2019.
All in favor?
And bylaw 2019-196 is a street closing with respect to part of Blake Avenue and part of Atlantic Street. That bylaw is just receiving first and second reading. However, Councillor Shoemaker has a conflict. Motion by Councillors Bruni and Hilsinger. Resolved that bylaw 2019-196 being a bylaw to stop up, close, and authorize the conveyance of a portion of Blake Avenue and a portion of Atlantic Street in the Plummer subdivision be read a first and second time the 7th day of October 2019.
Carried. All in favor? Carried.
And a motion to go into closed session. Motion by Councillors Nero and Shoemaker. Resolved that this council proceed into closed session to discuss an issue regarding labor relations or employee negotiations and one item subject to solicitor-client privilege. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matters without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Carried.
And a motion by Councillors Bruni and Shoemaker that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Carried.